Okay, so today we will be discussing JOI validations in Node.js plus Express.js. So, what is JOI and JOI? It is a go-to JavaScript library for making data validation, and whether it is a user input from forms, API request, or other data sources. JOI helps you to easily define and enforce validation rules, and by ensuring that incoming data is clean and safe, JOI protects your application from unexpected surprises that can be caused by enormous or malicious input. So let's say a typical use of JOI. Let's suppose a user has entered the following credentials to log into your application, and let's say those credentials are like this format. There is email, and there is password. Let's say this is a password. So now you need to validate this email and password the user has entered through your application. And let's say following are your requirements. Let's say for the email, the it should be a string, and it should be a minimum 5 characters, and it cannot be empty, and this fields has to be an valid email. And same for password, you don't want to be empty, this should be a string, and there should be minimum characters like five characters and maximum characters, so it cannot be empty as well. So what is a typical scenario where we use these? So in a typical scenario where without the use of libraries, we should create a function that would manually check whether these conditions are met for each individual entity. And let's say this is type of string, and it should be a string, and the characters should be 5 and 255 in between. There must be a valid email validating through some regex and all. And this method is long and unscalable. The easier and far more scalable method is the use of the JOI validation library. So to use JOI, you can just firstly install the JOI package and then import the JOI library. Here it is. A Now we will have a function written above here, and that can simply replace the following JOI functions. And there is a schema and email, it should be a string, there should be a minimum character, maximum character, and required, and it should be an email. And same for the password, it should be a string, minimum 5, max 255, and that is required as well. The simplification is quite evident. While the only a very few JOI checks are used in this example, there are many more, such as min, max, required, int, string. Multiple things can be used. So JOI.validate is a kind of uh, function. This is a kind of evident in return statement, compares the input object with the defined schema, and rather than returning a boolean value, it returns an object with two main properties, that is error and value. So you can check whether validation succeeded or failed by examining the error property or returned object. If error is null, the validation succeeded. If error is not null, validation failed. And you can access the error details in error.details. So what we need to validate in CRUD applications, let's go to this CRUD example I have created just to save time here. So in a CRUD application, each type of HTTP request serves a unique purpose and has specific characteristics, and that means request validation with JOI needs to be tailored accordingly. So following are the example. Let's take example for get request. So to help secure your endpoints and restrict unauthorized access, validate headers in a get request to ensure that request is authorized and coming from a legitimate source. So we need to validate this request headers here. And for the body part, uh, get requests typically do not have a request body, since they are used for retrieving data rather than sending data. So you don't usually need to validate the body in the context. And let's say for the example of post request, uh, header should be verified similarly to the get request. You might validate headers in post request for authorization and security reasons, and body should also be validated here. In post request, the request body usually contains the data you want to create a new resource with. Validating the request body ensures that the data provided follows the expected format and constraints before creating a new resource. So following are the examples kind of for the post validations. Let's say we are validating the headers here, and if there is error, we should be returning those error, otherwise we will be verifying with the schema. Okay, so again there is another method, put method. So for put as well as with get and post request, you might validate headers in put request to ensure authorization and security. And for the body, in a put request, the request body typically contains the updated data for existing resource, and validating both the headers and body helps ensure that the request is authorized and that the updated data conform to the required format and constraints. So this is example of put request. We can validate headers here, and we can validate our properties like it should be a GUID, and we can validate those as well. For the user schema as well, we can validate properties. Username should be like of this type, and email should be this type, and email should be a number and integer format. Min and max could be there, and it will be returning body error. If there is any error, we can return those errors. And let's come to delete request. So like with other request types, you may validate headers in delete request to ensure only authorized requests are proceeded. And body should not be validated here because delete requests usually don't have a request body, as they are meant to delete a resource that is identified by a URL. Thus you generally don't need to validate the body in delete request. And let's go to the conclusion. So the goal of this approach is safeguard data integrity, security, and consistency in your CRUD operations. By validating request headers, you ensure that only authorized requests can perform the actions, and validating request bodies on the other hand is key to prevent errors and protecting your application from vulnerabilities by making sure the data meets expectations before it is proceeded or validated further by the database operations. So JOI simplifies the entire validation process by providing an intuitive interface that makes it easy to adjust and update your validation rules as per your application evolves. So as your app grows and it needs changes, JOI allows you to effortlessly refine your checks and keep everything consistent and secure. You can visit uh, their documentation here, joi.dev. You can explore their documentation. There are methods that can be used and what is returning. We can validate date as well. We can put some greater functions and less function. We can provide ISO format as well to validate. We can validate objects as well. So these you can identify and explore.